Retro Quickies 3D Tic Tac Toe. My first video game console was the NES, followed very quickly by the SNES and Sega Genesis. For many years, I just assumed that was where video games had started, and when I heard there were consoles that had come out before those game machines, I was kind of ecstatic. What sort of games were played before the NES? What sort of adventures were being had in the decade or so prior to Nintendo's entry into the console market? How about board games? Okay, that's a bit unfair of me. It isn't like the consoles I previously mentioned didn't have board and card game conversions of their own. And while most of the Atari's catalog hasn't aged terribly gracefully, it is important to put this into context. This was one of the first home consoles with interchangeable cartridges, though not the first, get off my back, pedants. So there was a lot of experimentation to figure out exactly what sort of stuff you can put out on this magic box. This would inevitably lead to expected games like popular arcade titles, i.e. Space Invaders, weirdly ambitious titles like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and very basic electronic versions of well-known common board games or pen and paper games like our subject today. 3D Tic Tac Toe, developed by Carol Shaw, is, well, it's basically what it says on the tin. It's Tic Tac Toe, but in 3 dimensions. Which is actually a thing in real life. It's often referred to as cubic. The game is played with 4 different boards, all stacked above one another, and every board is a 4x4 grid. In order to win, you have to get 4 of your symbol in a row. In ordinary tic-tac-toe, you do this from top to bottom, left to right, or diagonally, but that additional dimension in this game isn't just for show, as you can now get a win with a straight or diagonal line that moves through all 4 boards as well. The added space and dimension in this game makes this feel a hell of a lot more complex than the basic game most folks are used to. It's kind of a checkers to chess comparison, as the depth and complexity of the moves and strategies you can make on this kind of setup is impressively vast, almost to the point of being able to play mind games with your opponents. Not with the actual computer opponent though, he is ruthless. Even at level 1, the computer takes no prisoners, makes a lot of really smart moves, and is genuinely tough to outthink. And there are 9 different difficulty levels in this game, as well as a 2-player mode if you have a friend who wants to play. The game's computer also has to actually think about its moves too, which is really funny to me as the screen goes blank for a few seconds at a time, as it is carefully considering exactly what it wants to do. Apparently this was a bit of a problem with some other board game conversions for the Atari, like chess, where the computer would actually think in real time about what kind of move it was trying to do, which would lead to it thinking for upwards of a half hour about which piece to move. It's legitimately a fun game, and challenging if you're new to its mechanics, and I would recommend trying it out. In a different format. As much as I was enjoying my time with this game, the Atari interpretation of it does have a few quirks that can make it a bit annoying to play. First and foremost is the control. Have you ever used an Atari joystick before? These things are incredibly stiff and tough to work with. And even shifting from one cardinal direction to the other can sometimes feel like a multi-step process rather than just naturally gliding from one direction to the other. Even if you're playing the game with a more modern controller with a D-pad or some such, there's a noticeable delay between the input and the movement. And while you can hold down a direction to quickly move along the row or column that you're already in, it's easy to overshoot your destination at times. But perhaps the biggest issue when playing this game is the perspective. You can't alter your view of the game board at all, you're always facing the board from this one diagonal angle, and that can make properly aligning the various boards in your mind's eye very difficult. I ended up losing quite a few games because the position of the various boards didn't align properly. It's mostly a consequence of having to find a way to show all 4 boards at once, since you don't have the ability to alter your view of the board. It makes keeping track of your own moves, as well as the moves of your opponent, a little bit difficult. But hey, it works, it's decently enjoyable, it's a cute little time waster, the same sort of sensation I get playing something like Snake when I'm trying to avoid work. And it doesn't try to be anything more than what it is, which is a good representation of a fairly interesting game. It's not exactly the first game that I think about when I think of the Atari 2600, though I do feel like it's the sort of game that represents the simplicity of that console at its best. You can all go now. The episode was just really, really short.